Welcome. I'm presenting a research project by Melanie Revilla, Bella Strominskaya, and myself, Hannah Schwarz, in which we look at predictors of response quality in the CRONOS panel. We focus on two potentially important predictors, namely whether respondents have previous survey experience and whether they are motivated to join the panel because of the incentive. The general idea we start from is that populations these days can be described as over-surveyed, so as receiving ever more survey requests, which leads to a certain fatigue. In this context, we also observe an increasing use of incentives as a strategy to still motivate respondents to participate in surveys. As this is happening, it is likely that more and more respondents are extrinsically motivated, which refers to participating in order to attain some outcome, here to get the incentive, rather than just because respondents feel like it, because they are curious, because they think it could be fun, or they're interested in the topic, which would be referred to as intrinsic motivation. It is often assumed that people engage more genuinely with tasks for which they are intrinsically motivated. So there is concern that respondents who are motivated by incentives might take the survey less serious and invest less effort into answering the questions genuinely and with care, which would lead to lower response quality. So extrinsic motivation might have a negative impact on response quality. But it is not quite clear if being intrinsically motivated leads to higher quality than being extrinsically motivated. The opposite argument can also be made that providing incentives might increase the effort invested into survey taking. For example, because respondents perceive the situation in terms of an economic exchange, so they might feel like they have to provide a service for the compensation they receive. This could lead them to take the task more seriously. So it might also be that extrinsic motivation has a positive impact on response quality. Our goal is to find out which of the two is the case, if any. The second general idea which we base our research on is that repeated survey taking can affect response quality. Some have argued that it should lead to lower quality because respondents experience fatigue when they take surveys over and over again. Furthermore, previous survey experience might enable respondents to develop strategies to decrease the workload of a survey, for example, by answering filter questions strategically. So this could also decrease response quality. On the other hand, the opposite effect has also been found, namely positive training effects or advantageous conditioning, meaning that respondents who take surveys often learn how to take surveys and they thus provide better response quality. So again, we have two opposing arguments and want to see for which we find support, if any. So from this follow our two research questions. Firstly, do respondents who are motivated by incentives provide lower or higher quality responses? And secondly, do respondents with previous survey experience provide lower or higher quality responses? So what will our study contribute? First of all, we saw that theoretical arguments out there are going in different directions, and so is empirical evidence. There are so far mixed findings concerning both the impact of survey experience and extrinsic motivation on response quality. So more empirical evidence is needed, which we want to provide. Secondly, we encountered the assumption about the specific causal chain that people who take surveys often do it mainly for the incentive and therefore produce lower quality answers. However, this mediator variable of being motivated by the incentive is not measured, only the survey experience on the one hand and the outcome, response quality, on the other hand are. So we want to fill this gap by using an explicit measure for what is often assumed to be an explanation for the link between survey experience and response quality, namely a measure for being extrinsically motivated to participate in the survey. Furthermore, in the previous literature, the use of incentives is often assessed as a predictor for getting individuals to participate in a survey. But it has been noted that more research is needed on the link it has with response quality as well. CRONOS is a probability-based cross-national panel spanning Estonia, Great Britain, and Slovenia. Respondents were recruited from the ESS Round 8 sample. The panel contains a total of 7 waves, of which we use the first, Wave 0 or the Welcome Survey. This was conducted between December 2016 and April 2017. However, we also use one question from Wave 5, namely the question about participation motivation, because it explicitly asks about the respondents' initial participation motivation, so the motivation they had when they initially joined the CRONOS panel. In the welcome survey, the average number of questions asked was 52, and the average duration was 15 minutes. Respondents received as incentive a €5, €7 or £5 gift voucher with the invitation to the welcome survey. Let me go more into detail about the variables we use. As predictor variables, we use web survey experience, a dummy coded 1 if respondents indicate that they had had any previous web survey experience before joining CRONOS. For being motivated by the incentive, we use a dummy based on a check all that apply question containing different kinds of motivations. All respondents who checked that they initially decided to participate because they wanted to get the gift card, and possibly also checked other options, were coded as 1. Then as control variables, we have dummies for gender, for high and low education, for the different countries, and indicating if a respondent received a tablet. So this was provided to those respondents who did not have internet access before, and it's important to take into account, because those who did receive a tablet had an interviewer present during the welcome survey, which is obviously likely to influence response quality. Lastly, we also control for age. In terms of response quality indicators, we firstly look at whether respondents had the tendency to choose the first answer option provided, so what is commonly referred to as primacy effect. This is operationalized as a respondent's proportion of all applicable questions for which they selected the first answer option. Our second response quality indicator is item non-response. Here we calculated the proportion of all questions applicable for a respondent to which they either gave non-substantive answers or just skipped it. Then we also look at nondifferentiation. For this we created a dummy based on 2 sets of consecutive items that used the same response scale. The dummy is coded 1 for respondents who provide answers on only one side of the scale, even though the items are formulated in opposite directions. So basically, this is coded 1 for respondents providing answer patterns sticking to one side of the scale, where this is implausible. Neutral answers on the middle category were not considered here. First, I will show some bivariate analysis looking at differences in response quality across levels of the predictor variables. Then I will show 3 regression models, with as outcome variables the 3 different response quality indicators. 2 are on a continuous scale, item non-response and the occurrence of a primacy effect, and 1 binary one, nondifferentiation. Thus we use both linear and logistic regressions. We use the same predictor variables for all 3 models: web survey experience, being extrinsically motivated, and then a few control variables. Then let's look at some bivariate results. In general, we see there was very little item non-response, so the mean proportion of missing items is very small. Overall, it is slightly below 0.4%. Comparing groups, we see that no significant differences between groups of web survey experience or motivation by incentive show up. The mean proportion of first answers chosen is about 15%. Here we see the group of respondents with previous web survey experience scores significantly lower, though substantively the difference is not large. Again, no significant difference between those who are motivated by the incentive or not show up. Then let's look at our last response quality indicator, nondifferentiation. The proportion of respondents classified as non-differentiators is a bit higher than 4% overall. This is significantly lower among respondents who had previous web survey experience, so we see less non-differentiation in that group. And in terms of being motivated to participate by the incentive or not, once more we find no significant difference. Let's look at our multivariate results. Here's an overview over the 3 regression models we ran on the 3 different response quality indicators as outcome variables. I should mention that for all of the analysis, we weighted the data with the available design and population size weights. Our predictors of substantive interest, previous web survey experience, and being motivated by the incentive did not significantly predict percentage of item non-response. But it should also be noted that this model has an extremely low R-square, so unfortunately it does not tell us very much anyways. Our two predictors of interest did also not significantly predict the percentage of first answer options chosen, so the tendency to show a primacy effect pattern. For non-differentiation, we see that having previous web survey experience has a negative effect. Note that this is in odds ratios, therefore this coefficient lower than 1 is interpreted as negative. So respondents with previous web survey experience were less likely to be non-differentiators. What are the conclusions we draw from this? In terms of our first research question, we did not find a difference in response quality when comparing respondents who were motivated by incentives versus those who were not. So we conclude that respondents who joined CRONOS because of the incentive do not seem to imply a threat to response quality. However, neither did they provide better quality. In terms of our second research question, we found slight support for the argument that previous web survey experience is beneficial for response quality, at least in terms of non-differentiation. Thus, our findings are in line with the idea of beneficial training effects or advantageous conditioning through any kind of previous web survey experience. In this case, one could think of respondents having encountered batteries of items before and possibly having learned that they are not always worded in the same direction, thus making non-differentiation behavior less likely. In terms of limitations, it is very unfortunate that we had a measure of extrinsic motivation only in wave 5, even though it explicitly asks respondents about their initial motivation. Secondly, the fact that the value of the incentives and the way they were implemented differs across countries is suboptimal. In terms of future research, it would be desirable to look at the link between incentives and response quality experimentally. While we cannot study the link between extrinsic motivation and response quality experimentally, we could complement the observational analysis with an experimental one, looking at if the amount of the incentive affects extrinsic motivation. Then we also recommend doing a similar analysis with better measures of motivation, so not retrospectively measured, possibly also covering the strength of different types of motivations, that is to say, the strength of intrinsic and extrinsic motivation. Moreover, we think further response quality indicators should be used. Ideally, we could even use measures of measurement quality, that is, reliability and validity. Thank you very much for your attention, and I'm happy to receive your comments and questions on this presentation.